I have never had such an easy time picking out a game to review as when I saw Damnation on the Xbox 360, because the game's box has a 5-paragraph essay explaining why it's the single greatest video game in the history of human achievement. Check out the reek of bullshit coming off of this box blurb. Evolving the shooter genre with its unique and exhilarating combination of fluid action and combat. Aren't action and combat the same thing? Damnation will feature huge, open environments, frenetic combat, daredevil acrobatics, and high-octane vehicle-based stunts, presenting players with an intense test of reflexes, quick thinking, and rapid-fire conflict. Damnation will feature vast, breathtaking landscapes, each covering miles of distance and thousands of vertical feet. Most of that landscape is probably blocked by invisible walls, but it's there. Billed as a shooter gone vertical and visually inspired by iconic elements of American history, these massive, streaming landscapes will form the battlegrounds for a post-industrial conflict between humanity and an unstoppable arms dealer hell-bent on total world domination. Wild West shooter with a stock villain. Got it. Players will be able to choose their own paths and navigate the world by performing daredevil feats on the edge of human ability. You also just described Super Mario Brothers. However, players aren't the only ones with mind-blowing acrobatic skills. Intelligent enemies will give chase and engage players in frantic gunfights and attacks that can come from any direction. In Damnation's world, there's no safe place to hide. Spoken like someone who thinks that Gears of War is the only shooter game ever made. With up to 3 hours of actual gameplay stretching out in front of them per level. I mean, if you get lost or hunt for Easter eggs in a 10-minute level, then it was still technically 3 hours long. Players will need more than just muscle power to get across each level safely. Well, yeah, that's what the guns are for. Damnation will offer players a selection of awe-inspiring vehicles, from motorbikes capable of launching across seemingly infinite chasms. Hooray for bugged physics! To huge, armor-piercing marvels that will induce mayhem with every huge shell. 1 tank level. Got it. The high action will be supported with an epic and in-depth story which, while focusing on the exploits of the hero character Rourke, is truly an ensemble piece. Players will meet and become involved with intricate story plots that reveal much more than the obvious. Doesn't that also describe, like, most scripts ever made? In addition to the single-player experience, Damnation comes complete with a unique set of multiplayer options that take full advantage of the game's expansive levels. Meaning you'll spend so much time looking for the other players that you'll get bored and shut it off. Maybe this was the advertising placeholder at a GameStop before the game had actually released, but my local used game store was still using it as the official box. So let's see how this game that I've never heard of apparently redefined the medium of shooters. The game's setting is a steampunk alternate history where the United States Civil War escalated until both sides wiped each other out. And then a bad guy named Prescott showed up and started conquering the country with an army of robots and super soldiers. And as I say that, I realize how pointless it was to make a story set during a major historical war when you immediately have a made-up villain completely hijack the entire conflict. Slavery and African Americans are not seen or mentioned once the entire game, in lieu of focusing on Indians and Hispanic Americans. I think they just confused the Civil War with the Wild West. Whatever, you play as Rourke, a Union captain who's part of a squad trying to take down Prescott with his 2 teammates. Winslow, a doctor who knows all the bad guys' technology, and Yakikin, an Indian lady who never wears a full shirt. Because seriously, who needs to cover your internal organs when you're in a pitched gun battle? This is the kind of story where you're thrown in the middle of a plot already in progress, with characters throwing around terms and names like you already know what they're talking about. These are the first lines of dialogue out of our heroes.
Stompers.
They're so boiled, I bet they piss green.
Prescott's making the serum stronger.
What did any of that mean? I have no idea who any of these people are, who they work for, why they're joined as a team, why they're after Prescott, if that's even their objective, how Winslow knows everything about the villain's tech, one single thing about the villain himself, or why there's exactly 1 squad trying to save the world and it only has 3 people in it. A good story would have an audience surrogate so stuff can be explained naturally. Here you're just hoping that maybe eventually you'll be able to figure out what's going on. Damnation is a third-person shooter, and the first problem with that is that the shooting is ungodly clunky. You know how in most modern-day shooters your gun doesn't actually work unless you iron sight aim every shot and it's a giant pain in the ass? Well, here, not only do you have to continuously hold the left shoulder button to keep your gun drawn, but the weapons won't ever hit a target unless you also push in the right stick to zoom in, which the game will constantly knock you out of that zoom. You have to iron sight aim twice to get any of your guns to do jack shit. The reason why you have to continuously hold the left trigger is because just pushing the fire button on its own throws punches, and the punches don't even mildly irritate the enemies. You clogged up the controls for nothing. Your movement speed is painfully slow, there's no cover button despite being built around using cover, you can only run for a few seconds with no stamina meter to show when it's refreshed, and you have such an abysmally small health pool that you'll consistently die in a few seconds, or often you'll just explode immediately out of nowhere. Yeah, if you try to play this as anything other than a strictly cover-based shooter, you're gonna be dying a lot. You'll spend almost the entire game with a basic machine gun that scatters bullets like a bitch, and the starter pistol that can pretty much snipe anybody at any range. The rest of your guns are a mildly useful shotgun, 2 sniper rifles that you have to figure out require you to push zoom multiple times to work, a grenade launcher that will never hit a damn thing, a replacement pistol that fires 6 shots at once and misses all of them because why not rip off Daikatana of all things, and a rail spike gun that I don't even know what this is. A worse sniper rifle that has to be charged? How come there's 1 machine gun and 1 shotgun, but 4 sniping weapons? The game was designed for online co-op, so you have an AI partner to help out with the shooting. In theory, because you can't really count on your partners to do jack squat. Sometimes they'll actually help you in clearing out enemies, but just as often they'll fire into walls for minutes on end until you just shoot their target yourself. And sometimes they just stand in the middle of flanking enemies or directly in front of a Gatling gun, getting shot to death over and over. So you use your magic psychic revival powers to resurrect them, only to watch them get gunned down again a few seconds later. They just get caught in an endless loop of dying, and it never stops being funny. You probably tilted your head when I said magic psychic revival powers, given that this is a steampunk shooter so hell-bent on realism that every level is colorless dogshit brown or grayer than a Snyderverse DC movie. Look at this! I'm outside in broad daylight, and the grass is gray! See, a key part of this game's lore that goes unexplained is that all Native Americans have magic powers, and you have a friend named Akahando that has psychic visions of past, present, and future. He gives you a chunk of his powers after the tutorial, and then, by holding the left bumper, you can Batman detective vision the area to spot allies and enemies through walls, as well as revive downed partners in combat. That's pretty cool, except you have to hold the button for like 5 full seconds to make it work. And you can't move or shoot while you're using the vision, and it's the only good way to revive downed enemies because the game otherwise doesn't mark their positions. Jeez, this power sucks! But the vision does come in handy for busting my AI partners when they get stuck in walls or break their scripting, and just hang around 3 rooms back so that the combat encounters balanced for multiple people have to be done solo! Here, you 2 sons of 2 bitches! Yeah, the partner AI is dumb as dirt. And with how many times I caught enemies staring at walls or not realizing that they were getting shot, the enemy AI ain't too bright either. Truly the brilliant automated adversaries promised on the game's box blurb. They slowly shuffle towards you wide open and only barely know how to use cover. There are some elite enemies near the end of the game that can jump like a mile in the air to reach cover, which I'm not entirely unconvinced is a glitch, but they don't really seem to be any good at it, as demonstrated by this moron who tried to leap up to a tall vantage point, missed, and smeared his face on the wall all the way back down, and then was so ashamed by his embarrassing failure that he just stood there to get shot afterward. Poor bastard couldn't even die with dignity. But crappy combat is only half of the gameplay formula. There's also a heavy emphasis on platforming. Each of the levels is loaded with terrain that you're meant to parkour over during combat, which will never, ever, ever happen because your health pool's the size of a gnat. If you run out to do platforming for high ground, you'll be pumped so full of lead that your corpse will be used as a novelty pencil. But in between shootouts, you'll have extensive platforming bits to traverse further into the level, and these platforming segments tend to be flat-ass maddening. The vast bulk of these levels have zero signposting to speak of. You will have no idea where you're supposed to go or how you're supposed to get there. The stage is almost always an open layout built with exactly one path that leads to your objective, and like 5 to 7 other paths that are tangled in that lead absolutely nowhere, leaving you to bungle around lost until you find the exit on accident! Other shooters, like Doom, will have nonlinear sections where you can stray from the beaten path, but in addition to it being pretty clear where you actually need to go, your exploration is rewarded with weapons, ammo, and armor. Damnation just has 20 blue disc things literally called collectibles that I don't even think do anything. These nonlinear bits are just endless dead air, wasting your time and pissing you off. I eventually figured out that your AI partners will tend to go ahead of you and stand where you're supposed to be heading like a waypoint, but you can't safely guarantee that. They'll also be programmed to just hang back and let you blaze the path forward yourself. And every time that you fall, you have a shitload of backtracking to the one place that you can jump back up onto the path that you need. I joked about the box advertising 10 minutes of content as 3 hours of gameplay for getting stuck, and honestly, I wasn't that far off. Not since Hunt Down the Freeman have I seen levels this confusing to navigate. It doesn't help that the parkour itself is every bit as clunky and slow as the gunplay, taking tedious and specific inputs to very carefully position yourself for every single solitary step of every jump. Like constantly getting lost and having to backtrack wasn't bad enough, taking forever to do both adds insult to injury. People ask how a steampunk wargame about motorcycle riding magic cowboys could possibly be so damn boring. You're looking right at it! Have pitifully short gun battles and spend way more time slowly trudging to the next pitifully short gun battle. But there is one more element to the gameplay, because after all, the box also promised us a selection of bitch-ass steampunk war vehicles to spice up the gameplay. And by selection, I mean one. You drive a motorcycle several times during the game, and that's the only vehicle that you ever get. And every bike level is a giant, flat, completely empty road, mostly devoid of hazards, basically just hoping that you don't fall down a hole that you could barely see and have to restart. I was going to say that you stop the game for a Mario Kart time trial, but Mario Kart stages have way more going on than any of these roads. The physics of the bike are also reminiscent of Carmageddon 64, with jumps that are ungodly stiff, and climbing any wall if you so much as graze a pixel of your bike against one. Spider bike, is there anything in this game to like? What's funny is they didn't want the co-op players to each have their own bikes, so one person drives the motorcycle and the other one shoots at enemies. Enemies that aren't even remotely a threat to you while you're riding a motorcycle. And if you try sitting on the back of the bike to play gunner in the single-player mode, the AI just stands there staring at you until you get off and drive yourself. And given how dumb the AI is proven, I'd pay good money to see it drive. I can see what the developers of Damnation were going for. They wanted to have a really active and kinetic third-person shooter on complex terrain. Think like a paintball match on a big-ass jungle gym, climbing all over and making creative use of the level while stalking and outfoxing the other players. But none of the game's mechanics allow for the kind of gameplay that they wanted. You're slow as crap and you die in a few hits. You either play Damnation as a cover-based shooter, or you don't play Damnation. The one enemy type in the game that tries to force you to use the platforming is the Automen. Robots that are only vulnerable to a fuel tank on their back. The game outright states that you're meant to use the platforming to get above Automen to kill them, but you can't. Setting aside how they nuke you with rocket launchers the second that you're out in the open, I tried fighting Automen with the platforming. Even if you jump around and attack them from high ground, odds are good that they'll still be turned to where you can't shoot their weak point. Your best bet fighting Ottoman is just to use cover to sneak behind them, or just hope that they decide to go after your partners. After all, getting shot is just about the one thing that the AI can do with any competence. I wasn't able to track down any information on the game's development, besides the fact that it started as a conversion of an Unreal Tournament 4 mod, but Damnation missed several release dates and got pushed back several months, only to still ship completely unfinished. In addition to the dumb AI and the horrifically unbalanced gameplay, I also saw rampant frame rate drops and screen tearing. It's kind of starting to look like this game barely runs. There was also this little incident where the game bugged up so badly that I had to reload a checkpoint. That is me stuck in a wall, and I cannot get out. It seems crystal clear that development of Damnation did not run smoothly, and they just never got close to the gameplay that they wanted to bring to the table. And you might lament that, oh, it's such a shame that a rushed development ruined everything. Like, no. You look at the game's story, the most bland dishwater stock plot ever, and you can tell this game didn't have any potential to realize. Seriously, nothing friggin' happens in this game. The story begins at a bridge called Arrow Tree, where the heroes fight Prescott's forces to stop them from doing something. They recruit a new teammate named Zagato, who's the son of the governor of a neutral city called Terra Verde. This is important because a full half of the game is going to be set in Terra Verde, so it's the one setting that you actually need to know about. The battle is lost and the heroes start to retreat, but Rourke wants to stay behind to look for his girlfriend. See, Rourke has a medic girlfriend named Dayton with magic healing powers who went missing out of nowhere during the war, and he thinks that hanging around this ass-end-of-nowhere location and this completely random group of enemies will somehow give him answers. Call it a hunch that Rourke isn't that bright. During the escape, Winslow, that's the robot scientist dude, gets captured and taken to Prescott, so the heroes ask their magic psychic Indian friend Akahando to use his vision powers to find Winslow. He's being kept in a mine guarded by two evil lesbian enforcers, while Prescott taunts him with hilariously stupid lines.
See that his death does not come too easily. I want to make certain he remembers it.
How do people remember things when they're dead, dumbass? Rourke asks Akahando to look for his girlfriend while he's at it, and Akahando sees her captured for experimentation and says to nab the villain's main assassin for answers. See, the bad guys have this elite henchman with superhuman agility and strength that's covered in a concealing cloak and face mask. They have magic healing powers, and they're implied to be romantically linked to one of the evil lesbians. The Revenant is Rourke's girlfriend. I'm calling it now because it could not be more obvious. Our heroes attack the mine and find out that a lot of the miners have been turned into zombies! Because Prescott's super soldier serum can do that, and the company overdosed all of the workers in this mine that they critically rely on. One, stupid-ass move by the villains to murder all your own people, and two, this steampunk game with magic Indians has a fairly decent emphasis on fighting zombies. They just threw everything at the wall to see what stuck, didn't they? At one point, you see a barrel being used to dump the zombification poison into a town's water supply. You're told that there's no cure, and you're forced to move on because there's nothing that you can do about it, except, I don't know, maybe stop the damn barrel from dumping the poison? Our heroes are dipshits! You rescue Winslow, and one of the lesbian enforcers, Jack, is pinned by rubble, and the other tries to kill her. Because this plot MacGuffin serum also makes people stupid to do whatever the plot requires. Yakikin tries to shoot Jack, but then Winslow stops her by crying out this!
Tend to her. She's bleeding to death.
But
She's my daughter, for God's sake.
What?! Okay, I swear that this has just as much context in-game as I've given you here. This completely random-ass character appears out of nowhere, interacts with all the cast like they're total strangers, and then a main character just shouts, "No, that's my daughter!" Did they not decide to make her Winslow's daughter until after the other stuff was recorded? What the hell? Oh, and Prescott has captured Akahando now, but they show him getting caught in the middle of explaining Yakikin's backstory of her tribe getting killed, so I didn't know if he'd been captured or if this was a flashback. The squad blows up the mine and takes Jack with them, and she informs the team that Prescott is going to attack Terra Verde to take it over. which is important because Winslow says that it's the last free port in the country. This actually sparks a debate between our heroes about whether or not they can trust what Jack said, even though no shit the villain is going to attack the one city in the country that he doesn't rule at, you morons! The heroes take their airship to intercept the villains massing for invasion, and they launch a bunch of sick-ass steampunk airplanes to head to the surface. And if you were hoping for a flying stage since the damn box advertised multiple vehicles, then you get to eat shit, because they all just crash land and the game continues its dull, dreary, repetitive way. And speaking of the box, you know how the game advertised getting to pilot massive war machines that wreak havoc with massive shells? Well, you find the artillery machines that are shelling Terra Verte, and you finally get to flip 2 levers so that one of the cannons shoots a rock to smash all of the weapons. Kinda feel cheated, to be quite honest. Now, even though the invasion has pretty much been completely thwarted, we still have to go into a weird underground city full of brainwashed civilians that you're forced to kill. God, this game's friggin' bleak! And then get into a boss fight with Selena, the evil lesbian. And if you're wondering how this slow, clunky-ass game handles boss fights, you literally just climb to the top of a tunnel and push a rock onto her.
It was a big rock.
By now you're probably asking what our main characters are like, since even if we're barely doing anything, at least we're following some compelling or entertaining people, right? Yeah, dream on. Each character gets one line of backstory, if that, and it's always dropped into dialogue as awkwardly as this completely in-context cutscene.
Something tells me we're not done here.
Something tells you. What something, Captain? The something that told you your woman was still in Arrow Tree? The something that got all your men killed at White Rivers?
Yeah, that's natural conversation. Hey, remember when your whole squad and everyone you know got brutally massacred before your very eyes? Rourke lost his squad and wants revenge. Yakikin lost her tribe and wants revenge. Jack was used and wants revenge. Zagato and Winslow are here just because. And that's all your character motivations. And they all have the personality of drying paint. The most generic and stock gruff badass replicated across 5 otherwise vacant vessels. It's like an entire squad of placeholders that they never got around to filling in with actual people. The heroes find out that the invasion of Terra Verte is still on, with an army loaded onto a massive train. So they fight their way down to the train to infiltrate and destroy the invasion force. And then they leave. Yeah, a revived Selena and the cloaked assassin ride past on a bike, and Rourke decides to completely abandon their quest to save the last free city in the country to chase after a potential lead on his missing girlfriend. Yeah, I'm not kidding, and his justification for dooming thousands of civilians, a crucial tactical stronghold, and more than likely the entire country to chase some tail is, well, Terra Verte is neutral, so they deserve whatever they get.
Terra Verte needs us.
And where was Terra Verte at Arrow Tree when we needed them?
Wow, and just like that, our lead becomes a selfish, irredeemable, insufferable moron who screws over the entire planet for a wild goose chase. Great job, game! I hope that he dies. Also, it's too bad that radios don't exist in this steampunk setting, because Zagato could just call in backup from Winslow and Yakikin, who aren't seen or heard from a single time through this several-hour stretch of gameplay trying to stop this huge, crucial invasion. Fate of the world's at stake, and they're playing with themselves back on the airship. So yeah, the Revenant Assassin is Rourke's girlfriend, who is snapped out of being the bad guy's main enforcer rather shockingly easily. Major props to the body horror design, but you kill off the villain's main hitman in a quick and easy boss fight just over halfway through. What the hell? Now we're stuck with Selena the evil lesbian as our only real threat, and she doesn't really do any... And she's dead 1 level later. What does this game have against giving us actual villains to fight? And so, with his own selfish quest and motivation shot to hell, Rourke makes this declaration.
Terra Verte needs us.
It's a little late for that, asshat! The first Terra Verte level is actually the only kind of fun stage in the game. You're dropped into a massive city map as you fight your way to the governor's mansion to warn him about the invasion. I guess in case he's blind and deaf and can't see or hear the gunfire and explosions just outside his house. It actually feels like a running gun battle through interesting terrain that's kind of fun to navigate. I think it comes down to the fact that the enemies are much more scattered, so you're not forced to hunker down behind cover for every fight, and you always know exactly where you're supposed to be going since the tower is a really clear objective. It removes the guesswork from the platforming. It's like a brief glance into what this game could have been had development not been such a rushed shit show. And speaking of shit shows, here's a bit where you climb into a turret to mow down wandering feral enemies who dress like werewolves. Yeah, this game has werewolves now. I don't even friggin' know anymore. Hey! Dumb bitch AI Jack just flat-ass walked in front of my Gatling gun. And now she won't get out of the way. We ain't that close, hun. I will find out if friendly fire is a thing. There's also a line somewhere in here about how the water supply has already been poisoned, which should mean that the entire city has already been lost. But that's never mentioned again, and when you leave, you see that most of the people are fine. They just felt the need to excuse why you fight a group of zombies out of nowhere, I guess. Anyway, they meet with the governor, but he's, well, stupid, and still refuses to fight the army that is currently destroying his city until after he's been fatally wounded. He gives you a key to trigger the automated defense system, which is flooding the entire city! Yep. Seems pretty on brand for this moron. I'm pretty sure you just murdered as many of your civilians as you did bad guys. Zagato stays behind to rally his people. Okay, whatever. See ya, dude. Our heroes just kinda decide out of nowhere to attack the villain's main base. Supposedly now that he's lost that one boss of his forces who barely actually did anything, he's apparently weak and vulnerable to attack. How is it that Prescott's armies are meant to be a national, dominating, unstoppable force, and yet simultaneously feel like they're about the size of Rhode Island? The first stage of the villain's stronghold, I swear the level design has taken another steep decline. One of the first areas I ran around for 10 minutes before having to look up a walkthrough for basic navigation. I had the right path for going further into the level, but you're supposed to be able to wall jump off of this tank. I tried. And it didn't work. And then there's this battle where you have to fight two robots that are backed against a wall to cover their weak points. This fight wouldn't be so hard if I had backup, but I don't. You're supposed to swoop into this area on a zip line that I couldn't figure out how to reach because you have to jump off more tanks, so I dropped down into this fight from a wall instead. And this one innocuous action completely shattered the game's scripting, so Yakikin is frozen about a mile back tapping her foot instead of helping me in this fight. And the cherry on top is when you take a bike to the entrance of Prescott's fortress and the door slams shut in your face. Your first instinct is to climb the stuff along the walls that looks like it was specifically made for platforming, but no, you're supposed to wander around lost until you spot a cliff off to the right that leads to a hole in the wall that you had no idea was there. But at least charging the gates let me run over a bunch of robots. And then get stuck in a wall. The last act as a whole went by pretty quickly for me. It felt like the level design was streamlined with fewer dead ends to confuse you. By this point I was practiced enough with sniper rifles to pick off most of an enemy encounter before a fight even started, but this strategy went completely over Yakikin's head, so her AI kept running into the middle of enemy groups and getting shot dead over and over. I'd revive her, she'd die again seconds later. This is what you get for leaving me to die earlier. Maybe this is why the game has so many sniping weapons. The comedy potential. There's a part where you see other victims being tortured, mutilated, and brainwashed into cyborg assassins. My first instinct was to put them out of their misery. The game doesn't let you. You rescue Akahando in a cutscene so dark that you can barely tell what the hell's going on. I had to crank this game's brightness up to maximum the first level to be able to see a goddamn thing that I was doing. And if you thought that Prescott having access to future visions would make him a dangerously unstoppable threat that the heroes have to carefully plan around, it turns out Akahando is feeding him fake visions because that's just the thing he can do now. For the final boss fight with Prescott, he jumps into a giant war mech, but Akahando projects visions into the sky of how you can kill it. You shoot the fuel tank on its back. Exactly the same as how you fought all the other robots. It's a rock simple and rather anticlimactic boss fight, up until about a dozen enemies spawn in, take up positions while you're frozen in a cutscene, and then they shoot you to death while you're out in the open with no cover because nobody had time to check the balancing of the final boss fight. After a platforming puzzle where Prescott shoots you to death if you make a single mistake, you drop crates on the mech, but Prescott is still not dead because he's shot up on super soldier serum. Serum that he uses to stand perfectly still on a perch like he's Batman, completely unaware that I have 2 sniping weapons to shoot him in the ass. You had 2 cracks at a final boss fight, and you botched both of them. Prescott dies, and the heroes leave on their airship over a monologue about how we can't control the future. Okay, when was that ever a theme of this story? Did this barely existent story even have a theme to begin with? I get that the bad guys are a jab at capitalism, hence the punk and steampunk, since Prescott sits in a monument to his own ego all game doing nothing but give his forces bad orders and lecturing his people about why they should be glad that he's working them to death while robbing them blind. It's the closest the game's come to a message, so what's with all this future crap? Also, I can't help but notice that they didn't actually free Yakahando when they found him, and he's not with the other heroes in this cutscene. We spent half the game trying to save this dude, and I think they just left him to rot. Whoops. Well, now that I've played the game for myself, let's take another look at the game's box essay and see how well it holds up. Evolving the shooter genre with its unique and exhilarating combination of fluid action and combat. Nothing about this game is unique or fluid. Damnation will feature huge, open environments, completely empty and barren environments, frenetic combat, cheap, unbalanced, die very easily combat, daredevil acrobatics, and high-octane vehicle-based stunts. You use the ramp as a ramp. Daredevil stunts! Presenting players with an intense test of reflexes, quick thinking, and rapid-fire conflict, because enemies cheap-shot you to death instantaneously. Damnation will feature vast, breathtaking landscapes that are all brown and gray, each covering miles of distance and thousands of vertical feet, broken into tiny arenas so you don't notice the difference. Billed as a shooter gone vertical, because no other shooters have high ground or vantage points apparently. And visually inspired by iconic elements of American history, Rourke's cowboy hat is the only thing that isn't steampunk gibberish. These massive, streaming landscapes will form the battlegrounds for a post-industrial conflict between humanity and an unstoppable arms dealer hell-bent on world domination. I didn't even know that Prescott was an arms dealer. This game doesn't tell you dick about its villain or its fantasy setting. Players will be able to choose their own paths, as in guess where you're supposed to go because we can't design coherent levels, and navigate the world by performing daredevil feats on the edge of human ability. Daredevil implies something a lot more interesting than slowly climbing endless empty shafts and houses is going on. However, players aren't the only one with mind-blowing acrobatic skills. Intelligent enemies will give chase and engage players in frantic gunfights and attacks that can come from any direction. In Damnation's world, there's no safe place to hide. Yeah, there is. This pretty much works the same as any cover-based shooter, just without an actual cover button. With up to 3 hours of actual gameplay stretching out in front of them per level. 1 hour if you count entire acts and manage to avoid getting lost. Players will need more than just muscle power to get across each level safely. Damnation will offer players a selection of awe-inspiring vehicles, from motorbikes capable of launching across seemingly infinite chasms, and nothing else, to huge armor-piercing marvels that will induce mayhem with every huge shell. You fire an artillery cannon twice for puzzles, and they put it on the game's box! The high action will be supported with an epic and in-depth story which, while focusing on the exploits of the hero character Rourke, is truly an ensemble piece. Each character's personality begins and ends at gruff badass. They get one line of backstory apiece, if that, and the few that actually have motivations are just out for revenge. Players will meet and become involved in intricate story plots that reveal much more than the obvious. Your story has all of one twist, and I called it within minutes of booting up. And I wouldn't exactly call Save Friend, Save City, Go Kill Bad Guy an intricate story plot.
Do you ever let up? You make my head hurt from all the crap coming out of your mouth.
Damnation is just painfully mediocre. The shooting is annoying due to cheap design, the fights are short and unsatisfying, the action is broken up by obnoxious and frustrating platforming segments that play more like tedious padding, and it's all strung along a story in which basically nothing happens, with characters so shallow that they might as well be blank slates. And to top it all off, the game is missing buckets of polish, with frame rate drops, screen tearing, and AI bugs out the ass. This is another instance where intent versus execution is a cruel hag, because you can have any idea that you want, but without the talent or resources to actually pull it off, your intent isn't anything but a mildly interesting footnote. A footnote at the end of this giant piece of shit that you made and you named it Damnation.